back to my channel. My name is Sarah, and if you've watched my recent videos, you'll know that I just got back from a trip to Montreal in Quebec, Canada. This was my third time visiting Montreal. I love going up there. I used to go once a year, and that tradition got interrupted because of COVID, but this was my first year going back in a few years. And for this trip, I actually went for work instead of for a vacation, but luckily my work is flexible enough that I was able to get all my work done and also do some fun things on the side. So it was kind of like a little mini vacation. So in this video, I just thought it would be fun to share with you guys some of my tips for traveling in Montreal as somebody who has been a couple of times. I by no means am any expert about traveling to Canada. I'm not a Montrealer, I'm an American, but I just thought it would be fun to share some of the tips and things that I've picked up over the times that I've visited, and also hear from you guys. If you have been to Montreal, let me know in the comments your favorite tips, your favorite places to visit, what didn't go so well for you, and we can talk about it. I'm also going to leave a link in the description box to a Google map with some of the places that I visited marked. So everywhere that I've personally visited is going to be marked in yellow, and they're going to have the little key of like different restaurants, bars, places I've stayed, and then anything that's in purple is places that have been recommended to me, but I've never been there myself. But without further ado, I just wanted to go through some of my tips and advice and insights from traveling in Montreal that I've picked up over the times that I've been, and we can talk about it. So first, let's talk about getting to Montreal. So I have driven as well as flown to Montreal, so I have experience doing both. The first two times I went, I drove, and I drove from Annapolis, Maryland, so it was like a very long drive. I came with my ex, so he and I were able to like switch off driving, which I highly recommend if you're driving from a far distance because it is a super long drive. I think it was like 10 or 12 hours or something like that from Annapolis to Montreal. But I've also flown. The most recent time I went last week, I flew, and flying is like definitely the way to go if you ask me. I flew from Philadelphia to Montreal, and you're only in the air for like an hour. It's a really short flight, but however you come into Montreal as an American, you're gonna need to go through their border customs process. So when you drive into Montreal and you reach the border, it kind of looks like a giant like toll booth type of thing. So you have to wait your turn depending on how many other cars are there in front of you. But you wait your turn. When it's your turn, you drive up through the little toll booth, and there is a Canadian border security agent, I guess, who's in the little booth, and they ask for your passport, they look it over. They also ask you how long you're planning to stay, why are you coming into the country, where are you staying, are you bringing anything with you? Like there's certain things that are prohibited that you can't bring, so they'll ask you about that. And then as long as there's nothing suspicious about your ID or your car, they will just let you drive on through. I do know that you can be randomly selected and also selected if there's anything suspicious to be pulled aside, where they do like a full inspection of you and your vehicle, which takes a lot longer. But both times that I went, you just kind of take your turn, go up to the little toll booth window, talk to the agent, give them your passport, and they just let you through. So that has never been a difficult process at all. It just sometimes takes a while depending on how many other people are there ahead of you. And the process for flying in is ultimately very similar. You have to show your passport a few different times as you go through the airport. So when I flew into Canada, I was flying on Air Canada, so I had to show my passport at the check-in desk to get my boarding pass. I also had to show it at the gate before I got on the plane. And then when you get off the plane, there's several different checkpoints that you have to go through and show your passport again. There's a big checkpoint at the very end where you have to stand in front of this little machine, and it takes a picture of you, and you have to answer questions on the like a little kiosk. And you also have to scan your passport there. You have to declare certain things if you're bringing in things above a certain value or certain types of items. But overall, again, it's a very similar process. Ultimately, at least as an American, it's very easy to cross the border into Canada. Okay, so next I want to talk about driving. So I had to double check this the first time I went to Canada, and I felt a little silly doing it, but I just wanted to make sure. So all of the cars and road signs and everything is the same as the US. Like as the driver, you're sitting on the left side of the car. All of the laws of the road and whatnot are very similar. I don't think there's anything that's really like majorly different between the US and Canada. But I know like, you know, in the UK and Europe, they drive on the opposite side of the road, on the opposite side of the car. If you were worried about that, just know it's basically exactly the same as the US. The only big difference you're gonna find in Montreal is that of course all of the road signs are in French. Montreal is in Quebec, which is a French speaking part of the world. So pretty much all of the road signs are going to be in French. There's a little bit of English here and there, but like I think that, and this goes for all of the traveling, like later I'm going to talk about the metro system and like just different road signs and things that you might see. Even if you don't speak French, it's very easy to figure out what things mean and how to get around just by context. My big problem with driving in Montreal was that I did not have data set up on my phone. I think if I was staying a longer period of time, I probably would set up Canadian data, but basically the biggest issue is that you can like get on your map to navigate yourself from the airport or from wherever you are as long as you have Wi-Fi. But then when you don't have data and you're driving, if you make a wrong turn, the GPS can't really correct you because it can't live update without the data being connected. So that was a problem I had this most recent time driving from the airport to my hotel. I made a wrong turn and then it took me a while to kind of like get turned back around and figure out where I was. So that's one thing that I would say if you're not getting a special data plan to go on your trip to Canada, definitely be very careful when you're driving. Try not to make any wrong turns because it's hard to kind of like keep up with where you're going when you make a mistake and your phone can't correct you. Okay, next I want to talk about the currency in Canada. I think that like really in a lot of ways it makes more sense to have money the way that they have it. So Canadian money is very, to me it looks like Monopoly money. Like it's very colorful. All the different denominations of bills are a different color. So like the $5 bill is blue, the $20 bill is green, and the texture of the money is very like almost like plastic, which is nice because like it can get wet, it's not gonna rip. But like as an American who's used to, you know, American currency and the way it feels and the way it looks, Canadian money is very different than what we're used to in the US. So to me, it's always like a little treat to like go and exchange my money and get this like fun Monopoly money. But speaking of exchanging your money, there are a lot of currency exchange places. There's some in the airport, there's a whole bunch in like downtown Montreal. And from my research, I want to recommend one that I think is the best one in terms of like not being a scam and having the best exchange rate and offer and the lowest fees. And that is called Calfrex, which is on Rue Peel in the downtown area in Montreal. That's the place I've used every time I've been. I think that the service is excellent. The tellers are really polite. The fee is really low. I think it's like $5 and the exchange rate is the best. That's the one that I've always used. And from my research, it seems like that's one of the best ones. So that's the one I'll recommend to you guys. The other thing I want to mention is that before you travel, make sure to let your credit card company know that you'll be traveling so that if you use your credit card in Montreal, they don't flag it or decline it. And also make sure that you're using a credit card that doesn't have an international transaction fee if you can avoid that. So for example, I have a Capital One travel reward credit card, which in my research, I think is the best travel card. So that's what I use. It doesn't have any sort of fee or anything on it. And every time you use it in Canada, you'll get a notification on your phone of the amount that was spent in US dollars. And I have a link to that credit card if you're interested in looking into it. This is not sponsored. It is a referral link, so I get like a little bonus when people sign up with my link. But I really like this card. I will leave it linked down below. It's a really, really good card for like points and cash back and whatnot every time you travel. So we talked about this a little bit before when I was talking about driving, about everything being in French. But as I mentioned, Montreal is a French-speaking city. So everywhere you go, you're going to see French words on everything. Menus in restaurants are going to be in French. Signage, walking around, all the names of streets, everything is French. I think French is a really beautiful language. I cannot speak French. I can't really understand when people speak French to me, but I can read French okay because I studied French for translation during college. The mixture of like being able to read it enough and there being enough context clues, like I think most people can, you know, make their way through Montreal without too many issues with the language. But one thing that I think is so cute that I just want to mention is that usually when you go into like a restaurant or a store or something, the person greeting you will say, bonjour, hello. And that's kind of like their litmus test because however you respond, like if you say bonjour back to them, they will speak to you in French. And if you say hello, they'll speak to you in English. So I thought that's like a cute little way for people to kind of like test out how they should talk to you. Pretty much everyone in Montreal is bilingual, so I've really never had a problem speaking to anyone. Almost everybody speaks English. There have been a couple people I've encountered that only spoke French, but they weren't rude or, you know, weird about it at all. The city is very welcoming, especially in the tourist areas. They expect Americans to be there speaking English and our horrible accents, so it's not a big surprise to anyone, and most of them speak English. There are some interesting laws and like some interesting politics around the French French language in Montreal. Like, I know that there's been efforts to insist that signage for businesses and whatnot has to be in French, and you can also have it in English, but it has to be like a certain percentage smaller. Sometimes, like in restaurants, they'll give you a French menu and you can request an English menu. Sometimes it's in French and English. So there is a lot of effort by, I guess, the government to keep the French language really central in Montreal, and I have no problem with that. I mean, that's their culture, that's their heritage. I love listening to everyone speak French and listening to their accents. It's also interesting to hear, like, I think depending on how Montrealers grew up and where they went to school and their parents' first language, some of them will speak French, and then when they speak English, they'll have this like very heavy French sounding accent. And then other people will speak beautiful, perfect French, but then when they speak English, they have a more like stereotypical Canadian sounding accent. So that's just kind of interesting to me as well. I think language and the way people grow up in a bilingual country is super interesting. So I had some cool conversations with like some shop owners and whatnot about the language there. But like I said, pretty much everyone speaks English. So if you are only an English speaker, I don't think you'll have any problem. I also wanted to talk a little bit about my hotel experience in Montreal. So the first 2 times I went, which were when I went for vacation and booked everything by myself, I stayed at Airbnbs. The first time we went, our Airbnb was like kind of further outside the city. I believe it was on the Green Metro line, but it was like one of the very last stops. So every day it took us maybe like 20 to 30 minutes to take the train into the city proper to do anything in Montreal. But the second time I stayed, we stayed in an Airbnb that was in like an apartment building off of Rue St. Catherine, which is the main like downtown street. So that was good because it was again right near the metro station, but it was also in walking distance to a lot of downtown stuff. So I've had a really good experience using Airbnb. I don't find it to be super expensive. I mean, obviously there's like fancier, expensive Airbnbs and hotels that you could stay in, but I think that if you're on a budget, you can definitely find an Airbnb that's not crazy expensive that is still in the downtown area. But then also the last time that I went last week, I stayed in a Sonder, which Sonder is my new favorite place to stay when I travel. Again, not sponsored, just my genuine opinion. I've stayed in a couple of Sonder buildings and I really like them. I find them to be very well decorated, very clean, very easy to use. So this last time that I went, I stayed at, and I'm gonna pronounce this incorrectly probably, but I stayed at Sonder Maisonneuve, which is again right off of St. Catherine. So that was nice to be like right downtown in the middle of everything and also right next to a metro station, so I could kind of metro to wherever else I wanted to go. Speaking of the metro, let's talk about the train system in Montreal. So I am so impressed by their train system. It is honestly probably my favorite metro system that I've ever used. My dad actually works for the DC Metro, so I grew up taking the DC Metro all the time. I take the subway in New York all the time for work. I've taken SEPTA in Philadelphia. I've taken the BART in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I've tried out my fair share of subways, and Montreal I think is definitely the #1 best one that I've ever used. It is super clean, it's super efficient. The trains are really well designed. Like on one side of the aisle, they have single seats on the train, which makes a lot of sense to me because a lot of people are traveling alone and it gives more space for the aisle to be larger for people to walk through. Some of the seats are foldable, so when they're not in use, they're just out of the way. I don't have a disability, but from what I've observed, it seems like the trains are also fairly accessible for wheelchair users or people that have different types of disabilities. And I just love the train. The stations are clean, the trains are clean, they're beautiful, they're very modern looking, they're quick, they're on schedule, like no complaints about the train system. It's also a very simple system. It's only 3 lines, and then I think 1 line has like an extension that goes out to one of the universities. So it's basically 3 lines. It's really hard to mess up where you're going. As long as you know the line you're on and which direction you're going, that's all you need to know. And there's only 3 lines. The trains are also the same price no matter where you're going. So similar to the New York subway, you just pay when you enter the station. And then when you leave, you just leave. You don't have to scan your card again. And I believe it's $3.25 or $3.50 per trip. Okay, so maybe the more exciting part of this video is to talk about things to do in Montreal. There is a lot to do in Montreal. Like I said, I linked in the description box a map of places that I've been before and places that have been recommended to me. So if you want to check that out, that is linked. But just to go through some of my favorites. So 3 of the main areas that I've been to in Montreal are downtown, Old Montreal, and then the area that's like around St. Laurent Boulevard. So my favorite area in Montreal is definitely the Saint Laurent area. It's more of like a small business, like local business type of place. Like most of the shops are going to be locally owned. There are a lot of secondhand stores, antique stores, vintage stores, but also a lot of really cute like home decor shops, lots of boutiques, lots of cool jewelry. There's quite a few tattoo shops as well. So I love walking around in Saint Laurent. It's just like a beautiful, more like small towny vibe, but still in a big city. There's a lot of places to go and the street goes on for quite a while, but it's just more of like a local experience, I think, in Montreal. And then as opposed to downtown Montreal, which is definitely more like commercialized, like if you want to go shopping at like bigger name stores or like eat at more like common big name restaurants, that's going to be more of the downtown. There's also some small companies and businesses in the downtown, but I would say that in general, kind of like any city, the downtown area is more of like the name brand type of experience. Downtown Montreal also has the art museum, which is so beautiful. Highly recommend. I went to the art museum on my first visit and I absolutely loved it. And I also, on this trip, I went to the Barbie exhibit, which was so cool. I hadn't heard about this until I went to Montreal, but apparently this is a permanent exhibit and it's the largest Barbie exhibit in the world. And they just have like hundreds of Barbie dolls displayed here, and they have them dressed in like all different traditional clothing from different countries, different designers, different eras in history, different themes, different celebrities, like all kinds of Barbies are in this exhibit, and it was really, really fun to see. It's completely free and it's right in the downtown area. And then over in Old Montreal, there's definitely like a lot of the older historical buildings. Probably the most famous thing that's over there is the Basilica Notre Dame, which I have been to a couple times. It's so beautiful inside. It's a Catholic cathedral. It has the depictions of Jesus on the cross and different saints and different religious depictions of things. You can light a candle in remembrance of somebody that you love. It's just a very like beautiful, historical, reverent place to visit. But other than that, there's lots of other historical sites in Old Montreal, as well as a lot of like shopping and little cafes and restaurants and things. So that is a really fun area to walk around as well. Obviously, like I said, my favorite area is the Saint Laurent downtown area because I love small businesses. I went into a really cute home decor shop that honestly was like Anthropologie vibes, except for three things, and honestly three things that make it even better than Anthropologie, which is number one, it's a small business, number two, it was cheaper than Anthropologie, and number three, there's no clothing, it's all home decor, so it's like a big variety of different stuff. I loved them. I contacted them after I got home because I wanted to know if they ship to the US, and they do, so I will leave them linked down below if you guys want to check out their store. It's a really cute store. And that's pretty much all I have for you. Those are some of my highlights, some of my tips and tricks for traveling in Montreal. I hope that this video was helpful, and I would love to know if you guys have traveled to Montreal before. Let me know in the comments some of your favorite places to visit where I've never been. Let me know your favorite restaurants, your favorite shops, and I will definitely check them out next time I visit because I would love to continue going once a year like I used to. And if you guys could give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, it really helps my channel out a lot. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!